Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is the continuation of our interview with California State University professor Robert Guffey. Enjoy.
Do aliens exist, and are they among us? Are weird creatures lurking in the darkness? Do evil entities hide in the shadows of your bedroom while you sleep? Join us as we explore all this and more on the Warped Reality Podcast.
Within 2 weeks of Richard passing away. Very strange. It's like they were tied together at the hip in Project Chameleo, and then they kind of left the world in this almost the same exact time frame. Richard passed away on Christmas Eve morning of 2021. And Dr. Berger confirmed that what Damien claimed was possible. So now I had two scientists backing up the story, and the confirmation from the NCIS agent in charge, who told me that Damien was a person of interest in this investigation of hers and told me to tell him not to leave town, even though at the same time she said they weren't following him. So that was like three independent confirmations from three different people saying that what Damien was experiencing was objective reality. So and then Damien and I kind of lost touch for a little bit after that. And, I got married. I had a newborn child I was taking care of. I was really trying not to think about any of this as much as possible because it is quite disturbing if you start analyzing the implications of all this. But it just so happened that in the spring of 2010, I was teaching a literature science fiction class at CSU Long Beach. And one day after class, I was talking to this guy in the hallway, and the guy stopped me and he said, can you think of something that is generally regarded as science fiction, but isn't? And I go, oh, that's interesting. And then I said, yes, invisibility. And then standing in the hallway, I told him like this whole story, like even longer than the version I just told you. And his jaw is like progressively getting, hitting the ground as I'm telling him the story. And afterwards he goes, can you tell this story in class next time? Next time we meet, you got to tell this story in class. I go, well, you got to remind me. And then he left, and I crouched down in the hallway and I pulled out a spiral notebook from my bag and crouched down there in the hallway. I wrote out an outline, bullet points of everything I had just told them in the exact order I had told it to him. And that became the outline for Chameleo when I wrote it in that summer of 2010. And it helped. It helped because it's such a bizarre story. I was kind of frozen, paralyzed, in even thinking about how to write about it. Like, where do you begin? And so talking it out, just telling it to someone else, it was just a good way of, okay, that's the way to do it. You just have to tell it in exact chronological order with these specific details. These are the most important details to transmit to somebody else exactly, what happened and the feel of all of it. And so, of course, I've left out a lot of details here, but I've since met many sane, rational people who also claim to have been the victim of this type of government harassment and have seen this type of optical camouflage technology in operation. And it's according to the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, this is in 2020, 1.5 million women claim to be victims of gang stalking, and 500,000 men claim to be victims of gang stalking, surveillance, and harassment. So, let's be generous and say that 80% of those claims are nothing but just mental illness run amok. Even 20% of those claims would be a lot of people.
Yeah.
So when you're evaluating, outrageous, outlandish claims, I think you do need multiple sources to back up those claims. You need documentation. And after I met Schoengert and Dr. Berger, after I spoke to the NCIS agent in charge, I felt like I had that. So it was more than enough to move forward. And if I hadn't had that, I probably would not have written the book.
And in Damien's case, I think that they picked the perfect person to do that to, because he was addicted to heroin, right? So, I mean, really, you can kind of expect some weird shit to come out of him sometimes, and I think they're banking on that.
He wasn't addicted to heroin at the time that this was happening to him, but I mean, he had been in the past. I mean, he'd been, and I say at the beginning of the book, this is an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
The book begins with a quote from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is a book that is a kind of nesting Russian dolls of unreliable narrators. You have an unreliable narrator telling the story of an unreliable narrator, telling the story of another unreliable narrator, on and on. And so that's the reason why I chose to begin the book with this quote from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, also often regarded as the first science fiction novel. And here we are talking about something that sounds like science fiction, but it isn't. So I'm well aware that Damien is an unreliable narrator, and some people, like, I did one interview, and the guy interviewing me was like, clearly didn't know much about narcotics or drugs, because he was like, well, if he's a heroin addict, maybe he's hallucinated, and it's not LSD. I mean,
Right.
So I mean, and that's another reason why I think that that's a common motif in these cases. I mean, I think they actually target people who would be unreliable narrators.
Well, yeah, because
they target people who are.
Yeah, for sure. It's perfect. I mean, who's gonna, I mean, listen to them and take them seriously, and like you said, the guy that interviewed you that didn't know much about it, I think there's a lot of people out there that don't know much about it. So they just assume when they hear that,
Sure. And in a way that's a pattern. I mean, targeting marginalized people, homeless people, prisoners, ex-prisoners, people in psych wards, children. I mean, that goes back to everything goes down the memory hole. Back in the early 90s, during the Bill Clinton administration, they actually had an in-depth investigation into radiation experiments conducted on children back in the 1950s. And so you can find, if you go to YouTube, you can find the testimony. You can see Bill Clinton apologizing to these people who had been experimented on. And what they found in the course of this investigation was that the same people who were being experimented on in these radiation experiments were also mind control victims, both at the same time. And the same scientists who were doing the radiation experiments were the same people associated with the MK Ultra experiments. So who were the people that Jose Delgado was experimenting on? Women in mental asylums. He talks about it. He proudly talks about how he succeeded in inducing orgasms in women from afar, remotely, female patients in these psych wards. And he talks about it in Physical Control of the Mind, the book that he published in 1969. So they would, prisoners, they'd do experiments on prisoners.
Joe can't even do that up close, man.
Oh, man.
I had to get my stab in real quick.
So,
yeah, you definitely did.
So John Rappaport wrote a book called U.S. Government Mind Control Experiments on Children. And in there, he reproduced the testimony from this investigation that occurred during the Clinton administration. So you see there the overlap between these things. So, but there's no way, the synchronicity is an interesting thing. And there's absolutely no way they could have known that one of the guys that they decided to target had a friend who not only knew Walter Boart, who wrote Operation Mind Control, but was also a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason who was in the same lodge as the scientist from whom they stole the technology.
I mean, you rob banks enough, you're bound to get caught, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's true. That's true.
That's crazy, man. That story is so fascinating, and you left a lot out, and I like that. I like that because, you know, people need to go check this out. And I'd also like to add that there are some parts in this book that made me like seriously belly laugh. There's some really funny moments in this book that I absolutely loved that you threw them in there because it helps to me that helps kind of make it realistic, you know, as I'm reading, and I like that.
I met this one guy who, I mean, I actually met him like face to face, and he was very reliable. He had a very good background. He was a professional. He'd been pushed out of his profession by what was happening to him, and in his case, he was an attorney, and he had represented a African American Muslim woman who was suing the police department for harassment, for physical violence, you know. And he had won the case for this woman, and soon after that, his harassment started. And he somehow came across either one of my interviews or Chameleo, and he actually came to my office on campus and talked to me. And his story is kind of incredible as well. But he had made some YouTube videos trying to explain his situation because his business, his law firm had been taken away from him. So like everything had been taken away from him. And he had made these like YouTube videos. And the thing is, because he's a lawyer, he's used to laying out the facts, you know, in a kind of very dry way. And of course, if you're in a situation like this, you're not going to find a lot of humor in it, generally. So, and you're going to have your backup. But the problem is when you approach people and try to convince people of it as much as possible, you can come off as kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
Even though you're not. The more serious you are about it, and the more you care about convincing someone that this happened to you, you can come off as looking more and more desperate and seeming to be kind of like a guy on the park bench with a megaphone warning people about the coming New World Order or something.
Sure.
And so I found, or it was just like a natural instinct in me, since I also write fiction, that it seemed to make sense to, you kind of have to like keep it light to make it palatable, you know. And I didn't really need to try to do that, because one of the ways that I helped Damien get through this was through humor. You know, I mean, because both of us have a kind of dark sense of humor anyway. So it was just naturally, you know, gallows humor got that term for a reason. The term gallows humor came for a very specific reason. You know, I mean, it's a kind of humor that that soldiers have, you know, in the middle of a war or something. It's one way to deal with it. And so, I mean, I just accurately, realistically portrayed, you know, the way we were discussing all of this. You know, I mean, some of it is direct transcripts or like phone calls. And Damien's something of a character anyway. I mean, he was already, I was just talking to him the other day, and I said he had been working on a book before all this happened. He had gotten about 130 pages into it because, you know, he was on the same cell block as the Menendez brothers and O.J. Simpson in the early 90s, because his dad's a narcotics cop. So whenever he was arrested, they would put him on in the protected cell block, like with the celebrities, because his father was a cop. So he was considered to be in danger. His life was in danger from other inmates, because particularly in LA, his father had actually arrested a lot of people who were in the prison.
Makes sense.
So he ended up on the same cell block as the Menendez brothers and O.J. Simpson. And then later on, when he was on the East Coast in Maryland in the late 90s, so this would have been like 99, I think, he ends up on the same cell block with Mike Tyson. And he, in fact, he was working in the library at the prison, and Mike Tyson would come in and check out books about the Nation of Islam. I don't know if that's
that's cool.
Like something that you have to do when you go to prison. You have to check out books about the Nation
Joe
of
should
Islam.
know all about that.
And
Joe,
so,
what do you know, Joe? You still there?
Know? I'm here.
What do you do for a living, Joe?
I am a correctional officer, sir.
Interesting. May I ask, not the general location?
No, New York. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And Damien was in New York too at a certain point back in the early 90s. But Damien wrote like this about 130 pages of those experiences. And so, he already had an interesting life before this. And in fact, for many years in the past years, he was homeless in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, he was living under a freeway overpass at one point. And now recently he's better mentally and physically than he's been in a long time. And he actually wants to write a book, from his perspective of everything that happened, and then all the way up to today, and which I think would be great because it'd be like Rashomon, the film where you see the same incident from like 4 or 5 different points of views, including this guy gets murdered in Rashomon, and then you get the point of view of all these different people involved in the incident, including the guy who died because they contact him through like a medium or whatever. So to get his perspective on it it'd be really interesting to have his perspective, his book, and then like next to Chameleo,
Yeah, it would.
So I'm optimistic. I'm hoping that he actually completes that.
That'd be cool. I would read that in a second. It would be cool to read that after Chameleo, just because, or vice versa. I think it would work either way. Yeah, you're right about getting that different perspective on everything.
And I told him that I'd found this manuscript that he started. I had it in a hard copy of it, and I said, I could send it to you, and you could start it here and just keep going. Because it's what he had been working on when he was interrupted by all this madness.
Crazy. That story is so cool. Well, hey, do you want to switch on over to the new book? Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. I'm happy to. It's called Hollywood Haunts the World. And you can get it either through the publisher, headpress.com, or Amazon, either way. Hollywood Haunts the World, an investigation into the cinema of occulted taboos. Very long. It covers 100 years of cinema history from 1921 to 2021. And I think I started writing it around the time I would have started writing Chameleo, probably maybe like 2010. So I've been working on it off and on, for over 10 years. And the book is all about, fiction's always been the most effective way to deal with societal taboos in a way that won't get the creators like arrested or killed. And film's been the most popular venue for fiction for almost 100 years or more. Mm-hmm. And so I deal with a number of different topics that couldn't be discussed in polite society, but were examined in the context of popular films. And so I deal with a lot of a subject matter that kind of actually correlates or ties into Chameleo. There's one chapter. So for example, I have one chapter that's all about what I call Darwinian horror. Films from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s that dealt with the theory of evolution. But, it didn't stop being illegal to teach the theory of evolution in schools until 1968 with a Supreme Court decision, because the Supreme Court in 1968 was very different than the Supreme Court we have now. But the 1925 Scopes monkey trial was important, but it didn't immediately overturn those laws. So you couldn't do a film, openly advocating, Darwinian theory of evolution. And so instead, you had these horror movies that kind of talked about it in encoded form, in metaphorical form. So, like, I focus on Murders in the Rue Morgue, the Bela Lugosi movie from 1932, Island of Lost Souls, on and on, The Eight Man. And I talked about how these films, they would deal with this topic of Darwinian evolution, but disguised, usually in genre films, mystery films or horror films, science fiction. I have a chapter about Westerns. But all the way up until the point where the topic will suddenly be dealt with nakedly without any metaphors. So, for example, in 1960, Stanley Kramer did Inherit the Wind, which is all about the Scopes monkey trial. It stars Frederick March and who's the other actor? I can't remember. Anyway, Spencer Tracy. It's Spencer Tracy and Frederick March, who both played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And now they're both together in this film about Darwin's theory of evolution. And so once you get the film that's about the topic, undisguised, no metaphor, there's no need to disguise it anymore. It's not taboo anymore. So the kind of subgenre of Darwinian horror just kind of fades into the background. And so there's a whole chapter called The Brains That Killed Kennedy. So it's the JFK assassination as seen through film. And I think I would have been remiss if I didn't tackle the JFK assassination, since that was a major taboo throughout the latter half of the 20th century. So I focused on a book called Were We Controlled by Lincoln Lawrence. And it's not the earliest JFK assassination book. I think Richard Popkins' The Second Oswald and Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment predate it by about a year or two. But it's certainly among the first, and it's the first to tie in CIA mind control programs with the assassination. And a lot of people would have first learned about Jose Delgado, who I mentioned before, another MKUltra scientist, from the book Were We Controlled? And the book came out in 1967, which is a full, 5 or 6 years before MKUltra was declassified. So this was definitely a dangerous topic, which is why that book was written under a pseudonym. We're not sure who Lincoln Lawrence was, but many assume it was a guy named Art Ford, who was a radio host and a journalist. And Were We Controlled was an extremely obscure book, but I suspect that certain key people in Hollywood may have read this book. Most people who read it at the time probably thought it was science fiction or...
What happened?
I don't know.
That's weird.
Style is prescient in terms of... can you still hear me?
Yeah, you dropped off for a minute.
You dropped out for a second, but...
Oh, okay. So you can still hear me
now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. In retrospect, it's actually a very important book because it's talking about these government mind control programs that were top secret and classified at the time. And Art Ford once claimed to Dick Russell, the JFK assassination researcher who wrote The Man Who Knew Too Much, which is one of the best JFK assassination books that came out in the early 90s. Art Ford once told Dick Russell that the main source for Were We Controlled was an intelligence insider who passed information to Ford through this attorney named Martin Scheiman, who committed suicide around the same time that Were We Controlled was published. So it's possible that the book is a mixture of genuine information and disinformation. There's information in the book about MKUltra that later turned out to be accurate, based on these declassified documents that came out in the early 1970s. So I'm inclined to believe that there's genuine information in the book. It's possible that that there was an intelligence insider who approached Art Ford And I think maybe they sometimes approach people with dubious credentials to release this kind of information while also muddying the waters.
Mm-hmm.
So Were We Controlled, obviously, it would have been a far more dangerous book had it been written by Walter Cronkite. So instead, let's release this information to somebody who's his word may not be believed by everybody, but we can still get the information out. So because it's the first or among the first to tackle these topics of mind control and the JFK assassination, I think it's an important book, even if there is disinformation or misinformation woven around the genuine reportage in the book. And I suspect that there were key people in Hollywood who read the book and were inspired by it or emboldened by it. But I deal with a number of different films. In fact, I start even before the JFK assassination in '63. So I start with a film called Creature with the Atom Brain, which was written by Kurt Siodmak. And Creature with the Atom Brain ostensibly is just a B science fiction horror film, but it was written by Kurt Siodmak, and it's all about this Nazi scientist who teams up with this mafia guy, and they resurrect people, and they're controlling them from afar using those Jose Delgado techniques to turn these formerly dead people into remote-controlled assassins. And you even see these subjective shots where the scientist is looking through the perspective of the reanimated, mind-controlled assassins. Now, what's interesting about this is that everything in the movie, everything they describe about the technology, really describes Jose Delgado's technology that would have been completely top secret at the time. They even refer to Jose Delgado in the middle of the movie, but not by name. But it's obvious that that's who they're talking about. So it was written by Kurt Siodmak. Kurt Siodmak was a member of the OSS. And Kurt Siodmak, in his memoir, Wolfman's Maker, because Kurt Siodmak wrote The Wolfman, he talks about how he published a novel called Donovan's Brain back in the early 1940s. And Donovan's Brain is all about action at a distance. That's the wet dream of any militarist, action at a distance. It's all about controlling people from afar and using them as these remote-controlled assassins. So Kurt Siodmak is contacted by the OSS, and the guy at the OSS says, "Oh, we saw this book. You published this book called Donovan's Brain. We thought that you were making fun of W.H. Donovan, the head of the OSS. So we started reading it, and we'd like you to work for us." Now, he never says what he did for them. Right?
Interesting.
So he says he went to work for the OSS. Now, I assume the only reason the OSS would want a science fiction writer working for them would be to write fiction for them. And in fact, I wrote a book called Spies and Saucers back in 2014.
Yep.
It's a collection of 3 novellas that all take place in the 1950s. And the title story, Spies and Saucers, is about this guy named Kurt Adamson, who I kind of based on Kurt Siodmak. And in the story, the guy is a blacklisted science fiction screenwriter who he can't get a job anymore because, he went to one communist meeting because he wanted to get laid or something. And now his name is on the wrong list and he can't get work anymore. So he's approached by this intelligence agency and they say, "Hey, we've seen your films and we think you're the perfect guy to work on this project for us." They don't tell him what it is. They just say, they give him plot elements, and they want him to write a screenplay, a science fiction screenplay. He doesn't understand why, but they're paying him well. So what the hell? So he's adding his own ideas into the mix. He doesn't understand what's going on until years later, when these alien contactee stories start popping up in the newspaper, and he recognizes all of the names and the planets and everything pop up in these stories from these people who claim to have been contacted by aliens. And he suddenly realizes that he's been making up these scenarios for them to enact in real life. And
wow, that's cool.
And so I that's one of those things that I suspect happened, but I can't prove it. So I decided to write it as fiction. But so I think that Kurt Siodmak, when he wrote Creature with the Atom Brain, I think he wrote it because he knew this information and decided to get it out there in the form that would not violate any security oaths. And by the way, it's interesting to note that years later, Rocky Erickson of the 13th floor elevators, he was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic in the late 60s, and he was committed to a mental ward in Houston. He emerged years later obsessed with aliens and UFOs, and it's reflected in his songs. One of my favorite albums of all time is The Evil One by Rocky Erickson. And on that album is a song called Creature with the Atom Brain, which is all about mind control. And so at that same time, also in a Houston mental hospital in the late 60s, is a guy named Marshall Applewhite, who will eventually meet a nurse at the hospital named Bonnie Nettles. And Bonnie Nettles and Marshall Applewhite will leave this mental asylum in Houston and form the Heaven's Gate cult.
Yeah.
So I want to, was Rocky Erickson and Marshall Applewhite in the same Houston mental ward at the same time? I mean, how many psych wards were there in Houston at the time?
Right.
And why did both of them leave with an obsession with UFOs and aliens? You've got Rocky Erickson writing songs about mind control called Creature with the Atom Brain. And then you have Marshall Applewhite and this nurse from the psych ward forming a cult and basically brainwashing and performing mind control experiments on these people who fall into his web. So throughout the book and the chapter, I'm making connections like this. So from there, I go on to another film called, very obscure science fiction film called The Gamma People. And the reason I know about The Gamma People is because back in high school, Damien was living in my apartment, my parents' apartment, when we were both like 16, because his parents had kicked him out of the house, which I think is illegal, because I don't think you can kick a 16-year-old out of your house. But his dad was a narcotics cop and could get away with stuff like that. So Damien was staying at my apartment. At the time, he was working at Sam Goody's at the Del Amo Mall in Torrance. And he came home one day with this VHS tape called The Gamma People. And he goes, look at this. And I think he just grabbed it because he thought it looked weird. And we watched it. Years later, as I'm working on this chapter about mind control and the JFK assassination, my mind drifted back. Oh, that weird movie, The Gamma People. So I went back, and it was never released on DVD or Blu-ray, but it was released on VHS tape. And I think you can find it on archive.org. The Gamma People is all about using radiation and mind control techniques on children to create these savants who will later grow up and be the technocrats who will rule the world. Does that sound familiar? And so if you read, as I mentioned before, the testimony that was delivered to the Commission on Radiation Experiments on Children that occurred during the Clinton administration, you'll find that the Gamma People, the plot of the Gamma People is not too far off from what was going on at the time. So then I looked into, well, who wrote it? So first of all, it was produced by Albert Broccoli, who went on to produce the James Bond movies. And Albert Broccoli, I was told by my friend and colleague, Gary Rhodes, with whom I wrote the book, Bela Lugosi and the Monogram 9. Gary Rhodes is a cinema scholar, and he's friends with Tom Weaver, who's the primary expert in the golden age of horror movies, the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Tom Weaver said that every time he tried to interview Albert Broccoli about the Gamma People, Albert Broccoli, he would just get angry and not want to talk about it. For some reason, there was something about the Gamma People that Albert Broccoli did not wish to talk about, and it would just set him off if you even mentioned it. Right. So I don't know if that's because he was embarrassed by it or if there was something about the movie that he considered sensitive. I have no idea. But I looked into it and I found that the man who wrote the first draft of the Gamma People, he's not credited on screen, but we know from studio records that this is the case. The man who wrote the first draft was Robert Aldrich. Now, Robert Aldrich later directed Kiss Me Deadly, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and a lot of other classic films. Aldrich wrote the first draft. Aldrich was Nelson Rockefeller's first cousin. And in the 1950s, at the same time that Aldrich was working on the Gamma People, Nelson Rockefeller held the post of Special Assistant to the President for Psychological Warfare. So it's interesting that in each of the movies that I pick, I didn't look into the background of the writers first and then see what did they write. Instead, it was like signal to noise. There were certain movies that popped out at me, and I thought, okay, whoever created this movie had some sort of insider knowledge. Then I would go and look into who wrote it, and you would find out, sure enough, yes, that was the case. So I'm imagining a scenario in which Nelson Rockefeller is, at a cocktail party, and maybe he's talking to Robert Aldrich and maybe mentioned some things he shouldn't have mentioned,
It's pretty neat how you connect all those dots between all that. That's really cool.
It was actually very fun going through these films and seeing them in a totally different light. I talk about The Manchurian Candidate by Richard Condon, and of course, obviously, The Manchurian Candidate, Richard Condon was not an insider. He wasn't part of like an intelligence agency, but he was a Hollywood press agent. And as a result of that, he met people like Howard Hughes, Cecil B. DeMille, and he called them classical monsters. The exact quote was, men who combine vast minds and dubious morals. And he also met Joseph Kennedy. He had several dealings with the Kennedys while in this position. And he said these experiences turned him into an anti-authoritarian. And he thought he was satirizing men like this when he wrote The Manchurian Candidate and Winter Kills, a later novel. But it turns out his satire hit a little too close to home because the FBI actually launched an investigation into him based on The Manchurian Candidate. And then later on, when Walter Boart, my friend Walter Boart, wrote Operation Mind Control, Richard Condon wrote the foreword to the book and said that reading Walter's book stunned him because he suddenly realized that all the stuff that he thought was satire was actually like on the nose. And so then I move on from there to The Parallax View, which is probably one of my favorite films of the 70s, starring Warren Beatty. And it's all about Warren Beatty as this journalist who witnesses the assassination of a presidential candidate at the top of the Space Needle in Seattle on July 4th. And everyone thinks that this lone nut assassin did it. About a year later, Warren Beatty gets a visit from his girlfriend, who's also a journalist. And she seems very agitated. She thinks people are following her. She says she has evidence that it wasn't a lone assassin, that it was some sort of conspiracy that killed this presidential candidate. Warren Beatty kind of dismisses it and thinks she's a little nutty. So she leaves. And then a few days later, she ends up dead. And so you can tell Warren Beatty is now racked with guilt for not having believed her. So he picks up the investigation. And he discovers that there's this corporation called Parallax, and Parallax hires through classified ads, finds people who are sociopaths or borderline sociopaths who would be perfect candidates to be brainwashed and used as assassins. And so Warren Beatty decides to infiltrate by pretending to be one of these sociopaths looking for a job. And so they pull him in. And there's an interesting motif that happens in almost every one of these movies. Halfway through the film, there will be a scene where a character will suddenly stop and say, let's watch this movie. And you get a film within the film. And then the film will show you information about what's actually going on, but kind of like in very thinly disguised form. There's a scene like that in Creature with Adam Brain. There's a famous scene like that in The Parallax View where the corporation sits Warren Beatty down and says, okay, watch this movie. And suddenly, for the next, 7 minutes or so, you get this incredible montage of all these images that are suddenly being tossed at you, these strange juxtaposition of very violent images with very innocent images. You get images of a man hanging from a tree, suddenly juxtaposed with, two lovers holding hands in a park. And then suddenly you get like images from a Jack Kirby comic are being thrown at you. And the images start getting quicker and quicker. And you feel as if you're in Warren Beatty's shoes as he's being slowly mind controlled. And so, I thought this is interesting. Who wrote this? So I look into it. It's based on a novel by Lauren Singer. Lauren Singer was a member of the OSS, just like Kurt Siodmak. And then I also talk about Winter Kills, which is another Richard Condon novel, which is fascinating. You could do a whole movie about the making of Winter Kills, even though it's a very obscure film. It stars a very young Jeff Bridges as the younger brother of a presidential candidate or of a president who was assassinated. It's very clearly the Jeff Bridges character is supposed to be like Ted Kennedy, and then his older brother is JFK. And his father is supposed to be Joseph Kennedy, played by John Huston.
Huh.
And while making this film, there was just active attempts to suppress it. And the producer, Leonard Goldberg, was handcuffed to his bed in his Manhattan apartment and shot through the head, while the other producer, Robert Sterling, was sentenced to 40 years on a marijuana conviction.
Wow.
And according to William Rickert, the director of the film, Sterling believes to this day that one of the reasons for his imprisonment was his role in making Winter Kills. And he told Rickert that his ambition was to follow Winter Kills with other conspiracy-themed films. But, obviously none of those films were ever made. But the entire plot of Winter Kills, and again, Richard Condon intended this to be satire, but the entire plot is that Joseph Kennedy, the Joseph Kennedy character, arranged by pulling strings with the mafia and other people to get his son into the White House. And then his son suddenly starts going rogue, making his own decisions and, starts hounding the mafia. And so the father has to put a hit out on the son to correct this mistake. And so I go on from there and I talk about They Live and all the way up to a JFK, the Oliver Stone film. And just like with Inherit the Wind, where suddenly the taboo topic is now being discussed in an undisguised, non-metaphorical way, suddenly you get Oliver Stone's JFK, which simply talks about the film in naked, realistic terms, without the science fiction metaphors, without the creatures from the atom brains, without the gamma people, without the Parallax Corporation. It's just, this is what we think happened. And so once you get that, then it's not a taboo anymore. And those kind of science fiction versions of the JFK assassination kind of fade out with occasional throwbacks. And in fact, there's a film I should have included in the chapter, but I didn't think of it until the very end of the process. It's a film I recommend, though. It came out in 2020. It's called Possessor, directed by Brandon Cronenberg, the son of David Cronenberg. And Possessor, it's all about this corporation where there's this assassin and they can possess you and use you as a vehicle to commit these killings. And so you will suddenly wake up from a blackout and be surrounded by like 36 people you just murdered. And you're like, what the hell? What just happened? And halfway through the film is, again, that motif of the film within the film. And they show you film, and they actually use footage from Jose Delgado's MK Ultra experiments on the monkeys in the middle of Possessor.
Wow.
So that extends further, this whole kind of encoded writing about the MK Ultra experiments in this kind of encoded way. And so the whole book of Hollywood Haunts the World kind of examines these films, westerns, horror movies, science fiction movies, in the way they deal with taboos in an encoded or occulted way.
How does Breaking Bad fit in there?
I write about Breaking Bad in the chapter about westerns, because I connect Breaking Bad, because Breaking Bad really is a modern day western, in many ways, and I connect it back and compare it to the films of Bud Boetticher in the 1950s and early 60s. Bud Boetticher did a series of films called the Renown Cycle with Randolph Scott, and these westerns were very much under the radar at the time, as most B movies are, and that's the joy of them, because they kind of exist in a temporary autonomous zone, as Hakeem Bey said, where the B film, it wasn't important enough for the money people to be really paying attention to it. They only cared that it existed, and if it made money, that's fine. You can do whatever the hell you want. So you would get really interesting things like Val Lewton's B horror films of the 40s, like The Cat People, or Bedlam, or Isle of the Dead, and these films that just kind of came through under the radar. And so with Bedeker's Westerns, the ones that he did with Randolph Scott, like Decision at Sundown, there's Comanche Station, They Ride Lonesome. They often deal with themes of indeterminacy in ways that other Westerns just simply did not deal with. In other Westerns at the time, it was one guy's a white hat, the other guy's a black hat, one guy's the good guy, the other guy's the bad guy. In Bud Bedeker's Westerns, these distinctions become blurred. This character might seem to be the good guy, but by the end, is he really? And Breaking Bad does a similar
very
thing.
much.
It starts out with a character who seems sympathetic. You're kind of on his side, but then as it progresses,
he becomes an asshole. Yeah. You fall in love with him and then he becomes a monster.
Right. And that's what's interesting about Vince Gilligan, is that that was a very bold thing to do at the time. Now we have a lot of anti-heroes in television. At the time that he did that, the only studio that would go for it was AMC, because they hadn't done any dramatic television yet. AMC was all about just rebroadcasting older movies. And so Vince Gilligan said, he had only directed like one episode of The X-Files, and that was like his entire experience directing. And no rational studio executive would say, okay, yeah, you're the guy who's going to direct the pilot episode of this series. But Vince Gilligan said that they were so inexperienced, they didn't know you couldn't do that. So I find that this is true in many different media. You got to find that autonomous zone where no one's paying attention. There's no money involved, or there's not a lot of money involved. And so you can kind of get away with something where the money people, they go, oh, go ahead. Okay. Like, what the hell? Let's just roll the dice on that. But then as people start to pay attention to that autonomous zone, then the money people come in, and now it becomes important and people are looking at it, and you got to go elsewhere and find a new autonomous zone. That's why I was fascinated by the conspiracy zines of the 90s. That's why I first started publishing articles in Paranoia and Steam Shovel Press, because no one was paying attention to them. They were considered to be just total trash.
Yeah.
And so same thing with like Phil Dick. Phil Dick was writing science fiction at a time when science fiction was considered to be complete trash, like just one step above a comic book. The first person who ever interviewed me about Chameleo was Tessa Dick, Phil Dick's widow.
Really?
She had a radio show called Ancient of Days. She read my first book, Cryptoscatology, and then she read Spies and Saucers. She even reviewed Spies and Saucers, and then she read Chameleo. And she had me on her show, and she said, I'm so glad you wrote this book, Chameleo. It completely clears up so many mysteries that Phil and I experienced in Orange County back in the 70s.
Wow.
And what's amazing about that is I distinctly remember having a conversation with Damien in the middle of all this when it was happening in 2003. And Damien said it's almost like they read a bunch of Phil Dick novels and they're making it come to life. And he goes, it's too bad Phil Dick didn't write a bunch of happy novels. Like maybe he'd be making those come to life.
Right.
And if you read A Scanner Darkly,
Yes.
which takes place, I even did a kind of a walking tour. I actually went to the spot where Dick's condo was, where he wrote Valis and a lot of his later novels in Orange. And A Scanner Darkly takes place in Orange County. It's written in the 70s, supposedly taking place 20 years later in the near future, but it's clearly the 1970s, Southern California. And there are two science fiction elements in it. One is this blur suit, and it camouflages you. And the main character is a narc, who is taking a drug called substance D that splits his brain in two, and eventually he's narking on himself and he doesn't even realize it. Well, that camouflage suit, the blur suit, it is so close to to Chameleo, that one wonders, like, was Phil Dick's brain just like tapped into the stuff? But Tessa Dick told me, because in the book I talk about how at Damien's apartment on Garnett Avenue in Pacific Beach, weird stuff was going on where his neighbors were moving out and new neighbors were moving in, and they bring in like weird like equipment into the apartment next door.
Interesting.
Eventually the landlord on the last day when Damien finally like left town, Damien went to the landlord and said, look, I got to take off. I'm leaving. And the landlord looked like so relieved.
Huh.
And I think that, they were like putting in, the landlord had to have known what was going on in order for these people to be moved into the apartment and all this. And Tessa Dick said the same thing was happening to her and Phil back in the 70s. And these people moved in next door with all this weird equipment. And then soon after that, they were hearing voices coming through the radio. And there were these voices that would insult Phil through the radio. Now, that's a classic like paranoid schizophrenic hallucination.
Yeah, because he was known to be he kind of went crazy there, didn't he?
Well, yes, he had the pink beam experience. And what we now know, because I talked to Tessa Dick about this, Phil Dick was in the Gifted program, which goes back all the way back to the 30s.
Mhm.
The Gifted program was where they would take children who seemed to be gifted, pull them out of the class and say, we're putting you in this special after school Gifted program. And then you'd get there. Tessa and her brother were also in this program later on, because Tessa was much younger than Phil. But they would take you into another location, and then there'd be a professor there or teacher, and the teacher would say something like, okay, I have my hand in my pocket. Do you know what's in my pocket?
Mhm.
What shape is it? Or they would say, we put something in a safe on the other side of town. Can you close your eyes and tell us? Can anyone tell us what's in the safe? So they were like teaching these kids like remote viewing.
They did that program well into the 90s.
Well into the 90s. And the
Yeah.
thing with Phil Dick was he would have been a kid in the 30s.
Oh, wow.
So this would have happened to him in the late 30s. So they were doing it as far back as that, which actually doesn't surprise me. Stephen Snyder of the Farm podcast has actually done several shows about the Gifted program. And he actually found fascinating documents, I believe, at the University of Wisconsin, because that was where KPFA, that's the Pacifica station in Northern California. KPFA, one of the people who worked with KPFA early on was Michael Aquino's mother. Michael Aquino, of course, wrote the Mind War document, infamous founder of the Temple of Set in San Francisco. And he was a psychological warfare officer in the United States military, particularly during the 1970s when he writes this Mind War paper. And Aquino's mother was heavily involved with Pacifica Radio up in Northern California. So a lot of their papers went to this university in, I think, Wisconsin. So Stephen Snyder actually found this cache of documents, letters between Michael Aquino's mother and I think Joe Hill, is that his name, who started the Pacifica Radio. And so she talks about, so Aquino and Aquino's mother were both in this Gifted program. So that's how far it goes back into the late 30s, which Aquino's mother would have been about the same age as Phil Dick.
That's crazy.
And so Stephen Snyder has actually found like the name of the guy who started the program. And so, I mean, you should really like look into that. It's fascinating and completely aligns with the people I've spoken to.
It's so crazy and fascinating. And I love that people like you are out there writing about this stuff. I love it, but it's really, really crazy. But yeah, I think, Robert, I think we're going to wrap it up here in a minute, man, because I think Joe fell asleep and I think we broke his brain.
No, I'm here.
We broke his brain. He's broken.
Yeah, man. A lot of information, man.
Really, really fascinating to me. Like I could listen to you all night, really, honest to God.
I could talk all night.
Plus, Ken, you know, I don't appreciate, you know, you should have given a spoiler alert, man. I haven't seen Breaking Bad yet. And you said the dude turns into an asshole.
Dude.
So you ruined it for me now.
It's an experience.
It certainly is.
Robert, my opinion, Breaking Bad is one of the best written, best acted television shows ever made. I mean, it's incredible.
Oh, yeah. If I were to do a top 10 list of top 10 favorite television shows, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul would definitly be on that list.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, for sure.
And by the way, recommend watching Pluribus, which has a lot of connections to Vince Gilligan's new show. Pluribus is a very Phil Dickian in nature.
I can't wait to see it. Like, I know it's coming out. It's out now, isn't it? I'm just waiting to.
Yeah. I've seen the first 2 episodes.
All right. I'm going to have to check it out. But, hey, listen, Robert, I really appreciate you coming on, taking time, talk about your books, talk about Chameleo, make Joe's brain hurt because he's trying to keep up. You know what I mean? And it just.
It's a different avenue for me. You know, it's definitely a different avenue for me to kind of, you know, conspiracy stuff and government stuff and all that. Like it's different for me to ingest.
May I ask what is the thing that you normally ingest?
Mainly, you know, ghost stuff, you know, like that, music stuff, ghost stuff,
Pornhub.
Simpler. Yeah, well, you know, I don't like Pornhub anymore. They got rid of a lot of stuff. But yeah, you know, it's definitely absolutely very interesting. I appreciate you coming on the show and talking with us. That's awesome.
When you say music stuff, do you mean, are you a musician or are you a fan of?
Yeah, actually, I've been playing guitar for like 30 years.
You should look into, I heard recently on Where Did the Road Go? The podcast, Soraya Azcast podcast. He interviewed a guy who wrote a book about UFOs and music.
Really?
I think it was called like, I'm blanking. It was like UFOs Symphonic or I can't remember.
There are a lot of musicians that have had experiences. Like Jimi Hendrix had a very famous one, right?
David Bowie.
Yeah.
I actually have a theory on that, right? Well, because, you know, artists and musicians, we have open minds, you know, and I feel like a lot of that has to do with it. You know, the creative mind is an open mind. And I believe that actually has a lot to do with, you know, musicians and people, artists, and maybe, you know, people that are slightly weirder,
yeah,
you know, experience a lot of these things.
Well, there's a book that called Cosmic Consciousness, and I'm blanking on the name of the writer, but it's all about analyzing visionary artists, poets, musicians through the centuries who he believes have had this cosmic consciousness experience. You know, William Blake, people like that, and everything that he says perfectly describes like Phil Dick's experiences in Ballas, or you know, like Orfeo Angelucci. You know, so I think you're absolutely right about that. That artists are either more open to these things, and that's why they experience it, or maybe they experience it and that opens them up. Yeah. It's hard to tell, you know, the chicken and the egg there.
You were talking about the gifted program. Funny enough, I was not a smart kid and not an intelligent kid at all.
Get out.
No, not at all. But I'm incredibly artistic. I can draw, I can paint, I can write poetry. I have several poems published. I'm ambidextrous, so I can draw the same picture at the same time with both hands. I'm a weirdo. When I was a kid, I got taken out of class in this program, and it was weird like that. They were doing little things like that, and I could never figure out why they would choose me, because I was not an intelligent kid. And later on in life, I decided that it was probably because Well, I'm very split right down the brain. I'm very, you got your right brain to your left brain. I'm very much right in the middle. I'm both-handed, if that tells you anything, and I'm super artistic. So I kind of think it had something to do with that, but who knows?
It probably did. It's interesting because, this whole gifted, it's gotten a little more attention recently, but like right after Chameleo published in 2015, I started getting contacted by people who said, "Hey, I've had experiences like Damien had," and I began to learn to ask them a question at some point, which would be, "When you were a kid, were you ever taken out of school?" And this was not something that was like really a common idea at this point, like in 2015, 2016. And inevitably, every person I contacted, they had a story like that, but they didn't even know it was significant.
Uh-huh. Also, Robert, before you go too, I think I caught this before when you were talking about military and they were trying to do some kind of invisibility type thing. Have you seen, I don't know if it's even like an AI thing or if it's the real deal. Have you seen these videos of the Chinese that have these cloaking sheets that like basically make you invisible?
Oh yeah, there's also those.
Is that real? Is that like a real thing?
I have no way of knowing for sure, but I suspect that that's probably accurate. There's also the Ukrainians have an invisibility uh, technology that I think was probably, back engineered from United States technology. Um, and in fact, not long ago, my wife and I went to the Art Theater in Long Beach to go see a movie, and they were showing a trailer for a documentary called The Grab. And this is a hardcore, very serious, realistic documentary about a journalist who was investigating attempts by various multinational corporations to um, illegally grab, maintain control of, attain control of a lot of valuable resources. The grab, and so in the middle of this trailer, they're talking to the journalist, and out of the blue, he suddenly goes, "I didn't know. I had no idea the story was going to overlap with invisibility technology." And I turn to my wife. I go, "What? What the hell?" So it's amazing where this stuff pops up. I mean, it's obviously, that guy probably has never read Chameleo, has no knowledge of it, and it's just that it pops up because it's an active concern for a lot of these uh, elites and corporations. I, I realize you're winding everything down, but you might be interested in this. While writing Hollywood Haunts the World, there's a whole chapter about Edgar Ulmer in there, who directed The Man from Planet X, which is the first alien invasion movie. And Ulmer later on did another film called The Amazing Transparent Man. And it's all about this rogue military guy who kidnaps this Nazi scientist who has invented this invisibility technology. And he wants to use it to sell it to other countries and to use it for his own power grab. Well, at the end of the movie, the whole thing backfires on the guy, and the whole laboratory explodes. And at the end, in the last like 2 minutes of the movie, the scientist is talking to this FBI agent, and he starts talking about how, yes, there are certain intelligence agencies who are developing invisibility technology, and it'll be very dangerous when this comes to fruition. And the movie kind of ends there. So I started looking into who wrote this film, and the guy was a man named Jack Lewis, who mainly wrote Westerns and war films because he had a background in the military. Well, I looked into him, and it turned out that he was stationed at Camp Pendleton back in the late 50s. And so I thought, oh, that's very weird. This is the only film this guy wrote that was science fiction. Every other film he wrote was either a Western or a war movie. So I thought, is it possible that he didn't think of it as science fiction, that they were already like trying to experiment with this stuff back, in the 50s? So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. It's another connection to Hollywood Haunts the World.
Yeah, you did a real good job
great.
at connecting all the little dots, and like you said, it was a lot of fun. I bet it was.
I should point out again, you can order it through headpress.com, amazon.com, and also I have my first comic book is coming out, The Upside Down Magician, which I'm working on with a very talented artist named Nadeem in Canada. And it's a comic book about paintings, sentient houses, Hieronymus Bosch, government agents, secret societies, and many other things we can't yet understand. And it's not quite available yet. This is entirely an independent production. Me and the artist Nadeem, we formed Burning Tarot Press, and we're self-publishing this.
Oh, cool.
So it'll be available in a couple of weeks. So if you go to my website, cryptoscatology.com, you will be able to see how to order issue number 1 of The Upside Down Magician.
Definitely be checking that out. I'm a comic book nerd, so
Very cool.
Excellent.
for sure.
Very, very cool.
Well, hey, Robert, we really, really do appreciate you coming on, man, taking time to talk with us. And I really would like to have you back on sometime. Maybe dig a little deeper into a couple things and get a couple of your new things out there.
I'm more than happy to come on again anytime you want.
Awesome. Appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Robert. And we'll talk to you soon. We'll let you know when the show is going to be on, and have a great night.
Excellent. Great. And yes, thanks once again for inviting me back on.
Thank you for listening to the Warped Reality Paranormal Podcast, and thank you to all of our guests and contributors that help make this show possible. For more information on the show, to listen to every episode, read paranormal news, or to submit your paranormal experience, check out warpedrealityparanormal.com. You could also email me at ghostjoeny@gmail.com. The Warped Reality Paranormal Podcast, uncovering the unseen.